Welcome to EMDR, the science behind the therapy, a podcast from the Sonoma Psychotherapy Training Institute. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Leeds. In each episode, we explore the latest research and clinical insights about EMDR therapy, highlighting the leading scholars' latest contributions to EMDR research, education, and training. Whether you're a therapist, a student, or a lifelong learner, I'm here to connect you to the science behind the practice of this remarkable form of psychotherapy. I welcome your feedback and suggestions for topics to be considered or any issues you encounter in my summaries of the research. You can reach me through the Contact Me form on any of the websites listed in the show notes. Before we start, I want to draw your attention to the unique EMDR therapy training delivered by Sonoma Psychotherapy Training Institute. Sonoma PTI provides a comprehensive program in 4 two-day modules spread over a 12-week period. These 4 modules include all required hours of lecture practice and group consultation. Our Zoom-based program is open to clinicians from throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. I invite you to look over our curriculum and training schedule at sonomapti.com. Today's podcast focuses on group EMDR therapy. First, we will touch on some early and recent research on group EMDR therapy. Then we will present 2 interviews with important contributors to the literature on group EMDR therapy, Ignacio Nacho Jarero and Regina Morrow Robinson. To access any of the original research papers mentioned in the podcast, you will find a complete list of references and links to each of these studies in the January 2026 blog on sonomapti.com. Just go to sonomapti.com, click on the blog section on the far right of the menu bar, and then select the January 2026 listings. So let's get started with the background to today's episode on group EMDR therapy. EMDR group therapy begins with Nacho Jarero and his partner Lucina Artigas, who together developed and first disseminated the EMDR Integrative Group Treatment Protocol, or EMDR-IGTP, in 1998. The first research report on the EMDR-IGTP was on its use with refugee children in Germany in a poster session by Wilson, Tinker, Hoffman, Becker, and Marshall in 2000. The first 2 published research articles on the EMDR-IGTP also addressed its use with children. An article by Fernandez, Gallinari, and Lorenzi in 2004 focused on children who witnessed an airplane crash in Italy. Then Arduras, Bluthgen, and Knopfler in 2009 reported on its use with child victims of a flood in Argentina. The Group Trauma Episode Protocol, or GTEP, was developed by Ilan Shapiro and Berit Laub 10 years after the IGTP in 2008. The first report on the GTEP was a field study from Maria Lengung and co-authors in 2017, examining its use in Germany with refugees from Syria and Iraq. The first pilot randomized controlled trial of the GTEP was published by Kupsing and co-authors in 2020 and addressed its use with former child slaves in India. The most recent published report is from Cindy Palin and co-authors in 2025 on the remote delivery of GTEP for clinicians who had been providing services in the war zones of Ukraine, which I summarized in episode 5 in December 2025. There are currently 54 listings on various EMDR group therapy publications listed in the EMDR group therapy section on sonomapti.com/EMDR-research. Of these, 26 are randomized studies. Of these randomized studies, 10 of the articles are from first author Nacho Jarero, who is my first guest on today's podcast. Dr. Ignacio Jarero, Ph.D., EDD, who is widely known as Nacho, is the world pioneer in providing EMDR therapy in a group format, in person and online. His innovative work has extended AIP-informed advanced psychosocial interventions for trauma-exposed populations and AIP-informed treatment intervention procedures for in-person and remote treatment. For his humanitarian services worldwide, with over 200 deployments, often working in worst-case scenarios, he received the Francine Shapiro Award, the International Crisis Response Leadership Award, and the Psychotrauma Trajectory Award. As a senior researcher, Dr. Jarero's contributions have been instrumental in the field. He was honored with the EMDR International Association Outstanding Research Award, and he played a key role in guiding the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies to conclude that EMDR therapy is an evidence-based treatment for acute stress disorder. Well, welcome, Nacho. I'm delighted that you're able to join me for this discussion about your work with Group EMDR therapy.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Andrew.
I'm really curious to know more about how things got started and what setting were you working before you trained in EMDR therapy?
Well, my wife, Lucy Artigas, the originator and developer of the Butterfly Hug, and I were working as a couple therapist using systemic, Jungian, and body-oriented approaches. I can remember how frustrated we felt treating clients with PTSD with these approaches without any success.
I can relate to that experience, Nacho. I felt the same way before I was trained in EMDR. Like, I'm just sitting here struggling with my patients whose suffering went on and on. So then when and with whom were you initially trained in EMDR therapy?
My first encounter with the EMDR was in 1997. Lucy and I attended a family therapy conference, and as we walked through the halls, we saw a small sign at the entrance to one of the classrooms that said EMDR. We entered the room out of pure curiosity. An American woman gave a talk on EMDR to the dozen or so attendees. At the end of the lecture, Lucy and I approached her, and she told us that she had been trained by the creator of EMDR, Dr. Francine Shapiro, and that she had her permission to train others. At that time, we didn't know she was lying to us. So Lucy and I went to her house and received the Level 1 training. Finally, we completed the official EMDR training in September 1998. The fortuitous encounter Lucy and I had with EMDR therapy in 1997 changed our lives. I remember that during the drive home after our field work in Acapulco, early in 1998, Lucy and I made two transformative decisions. The first was to dedicate our professional lives to alleviating human sufferings caused by trauma through EMDR therapy. And the second was to achieve this through humanitarian. In this regard, through our most recent humanitarian project called the Assist Heart, from March 2022 to December 2025, nearly 12,000 specialized mental health providers from 57 countries have been trained pro bono, supporting countless children, adolescents, and adults, survivors of catastrophic scenarios worldwide.
Well, I just am such an admirer of the humanitarian work that you've been doing since you began your training in EMDR. What are the steps that led to the development and later the dissemination of the EMDR Integrated Group Treatment Protocol, known as IGTP. And what was the role played by Lucy in that process?
On October 8, 1997, Hurricane Pauline devastated the coast of the Mexican states of Oaxaca and Guerrero, becoming one of the deadliest, most destructive, and costliest hurricanes in the country's history. Seeing the scenes of devastation on television, Lucy and I felt a fire in the belly, an urgent need to help. So we organized the first humanitarian aid effort of our lives. In January 1998, we arrived in Acapulco, the capital of the state of Guerrero, with very little knowledge of EMDR and none of early intervention, but with a great desire to help. On the first day working in the field, we arrived at the Casa de la Cultura, House of Culture, and over 200 people were waiting for us. We decided to teach self-soothing techniques. At the end of the day, I was leading an exercise called the Light Stream, and I asked Lucy to bring it to a close. She was happily playing with a small 4-year-old boy who, between laugh and spontaneous hugs, asked her, "When you return home, who will hug me?" She put herself in the center of the circle of people, and in a moment of inspiration, she answered him with a butterfly hug. A few days later, the state government asked us to help children from a school 2 hours away from Acapulco. When we arrived, we were informed that the hurricane had destroyed the school and that the children were taking classes under a mango tree using long wooden tables. While I was talking with the teachers and thinking about how we could provide individual EMDR therapy for dozens of children, Lucy started playing with a small group of them. They sat in a circle around Lucy, under a mango tree as a roof and sea sand as a floor. She asked the children if they remembered the hurricane, and all of them said yes. Then she asked if they still felt afraid, and all of them said yes. Lucy asked them to use their fingers and draw in the sand how they felt at that moment. Once the children finished the drawing, Lucy taught them the butterfly hug and instructed them to let whatever happened happen, and to stop when they felt in their body that it was been enough. Once the children stopped the butterfly hug, she asked them to erase the drawing and draw how they felt at that moment. She repeated this procedure a few times, then asked the children to remember the hurricane again and whether they still felt the fear. The children's answer was not at all. Then the children returned to play, and Lucy approached me and said, "I know what to do to help these children." At that moment, the first EMDR group protocol in the world was born.
So then, as you described this, it was Lucy's spontaneous insight about a strategy that she could use under those very primitive conditions. There was no art materials, there was nothing at hand except the tables and the sand, and she used what was available to deliver a group EMDR therapy treatment to these children who needed it so desperately.
That's correct. And let me share with you that this method of drawing with the finger in the sand has been replicated around the world in circumstances in which there are not paper or crayons or anything else but the finger.
I am looking forward to hearing more about that as we continue to talk about the research you've done to validate the effectiveness of these innovations. Um, but I can only imagine that there must have been many challenges. What were some of those early challenges and the impressions of the results from the field work with group EMDR therapy?
Three main early challenges. The first one was that EMDR therapy was practically unknown in Latin America. The second one was that Lucy and I were totally unknown in Latin America. And the third one was that there was no research on group EMDR therapy worldwide. In 1998, Lucy and I sent Dr. Francine Shapiro photos and a description of our work in Acapulco by regular mail. She was fascinated and suggested that we conduct research. I remember saying to her, "What is the purpose of research, Dr. Shapiro, if we already saw the amazing results?" Her answer was, "You must conduct research to solidify your work in the eyes of the world, to have it declared empirically validated by the large international organizations such as UNICEF. Then thousands more will be healed in the coming years." And we followed her suggestion, encouraging and guiding others to conduct research. The result was that as of today, our protocols and treatment interventions have 98 peer-reviewed publications in international academic journals spanning over 50 clinical populations, making them the most researched in the EMDR early intervention and ongoing traumatic stress field.
Well, it's a remarkable body of work that you and the colleagues that you've trained have achieved in these relatively few years, Nacho. It's every time we've spoken, I've been impressed by the work that you've done to produce such a large body of research in the MDR. What are some of the challenges that you've had to overcome in carrying out controlled research on group EMDR therapy? I know it has never been an easy process.
You are correct, Andrew. Since 1998, Lucy and I have faced four main challenges while providing EMDR therapy in the field to individuals affected by natural or human-provoked disasters and conducting research in such difficult circumstances. Those main challenges have led to breakthroughs in the field of EMDR therapy. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, was in 1998 after Hurricane Pauline. The challenge was how to provide individual EMDR therapy in a group format to alleviate the suffering of many people with a limited number of EMDR clinicians. The solution was the development of the EMDR Integrated Treatment Protocol, EMDR IGTP, for early intervention, and the EMDR butterfly hug method for self-administered bilateral stimulation. At that time, we had no formal training in conducting research, and we had to learn how to do so in such difficult circumstances with highly mobile populations and the ethical mandate to provide therapy to all study participants. The answer was to conduct randomized control trial with 4 assessment times and with 2 arms: the immediate treatment group and the delayed treatment group, rather than a waitlist control group. The second challenge was a few years later when we realized that many populations were living with recent, present, or past prolonged adverse experiences, which produced life-lasting, ongoing, or prolonged traumatic stress. To address these populations, we developed and researched the EMDR IGTP for ongoing traumatic stress and the EMDR protocol for recent critical incidents and ongoing traumatic stress, EMDR-trained. The third one was right after the September 19, 2017 earthquake in Mexico City, and the challenge was how to treat and conduct research on acute stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder intrusion symptoms to regulate the autonomic nervous system of thousands of survivors in an efficient, effective, and secure way. The answer was the acute stress syndrome stabilization assist. One was the COVID-19 pandemic, during which we developed and conducted research on online versions of the protocols and treatment interventions I previously mentioned.
I was particularly impressed when I first came across the research with the health professionals being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. As I'm sure all the listeners remember, in the beginning, there were no effective treatments, there were no vaccines, and as a result, the medical professionals were facing just devastating illness and so many deaths. It was horribly difficult for them to continue to provide services to the patients in the hospitals in those conditions. You reached out and worked with those professionals to provide support for them with remote administered group EMDR therapy. When I read that study, I was so bowled over. I was just amazed at what you had been able to achieve, because actually, to that point, I've been very skeptical about remote delivery of even individual EMDR therapy, let alone group administered EMDR therapy. But the results of that study were so impressive.
Indeed.
Those
Andrew.
medical professionals were able to return to work. I'm just curious, there have been so many of these studies. It's such an impressive body of work. Every other month, I receive another article from you about the latest research that you and your colleagues have carried out and published. We won't have time to discuss all of the work that you've overseen and carried out, but which specific studies do you feel have to help advance group EMDR therapy the most?
Andrew, this is a difficult question because our group protocols have over 50 studies. Still, I will choose 3 longitudinal, multi-site, randomized controlled trials with the EMDR integrated group treatment protocol for ongoing traumatic stress. The first one was conducted in person in Valencia, Spain, and published in 2019. This study aimed to evaluate the effectiveness of the protocol in reducing severe PTSD, depression, and anxiety symptoms in refugee minors from Africa living in 6 refugee sites. In this study, 184 minors participated and received an average of 8 hours of treatment provided simultaneously during 9 group treatment sessions 3 times daily during 3 consecutive days in a setting inside the refugee sites. The study results indicate that the intensive administration of the protocol could be a feasible, cost-effective, time-efficient, culturally sensitive, very important, an effective component of a multidisciplinary, psychosocial group-based program to address PTSD, depression, and anxiety symptoms among refugee minors. Regarding safety, no adverse effects or events were reported by participants during treatment or at follow-up. The second one was conducted in person in Mexico and published in the year 2025. This study aimed to evaluate the effectiveness and safety of the protocol in reducing PTSD symptoms and loss of PTSD or complex PTSD diagnostic status in polytraumatized children and adolescents affected by prolonged adverse childhood experiences, neglect, and maltreatment. A total of 109 children and adolescents living in 12 social assistance centers under the Mexican government protection met the inclusion criteria and participated in a 2-day intensive treatment program. Regarding PTSD and complex PTSD diagnosis, 63.33% of the treatment group participants fulfilled the diagnostic criteria at pre-treatment, whereas only 11.66% still met the diagnostic criteria at follow-up. This reflects a 51.67% loss of diagnostic status. In contrast, 57.14% of the control group participants fulfilled the diagnostic criteria at pre-treatment and 69.39% at follow-up, indicating an increase of 12.25% in diagnostic status. It is important to mention that all control group participants also received the protocol immediately after the data collection. Regarding safety, no adverse effects or events were reported by participants during treatment or at follow-up.
So in that study, Nacho, this was done with about 6 treatment sessions over just a few days.
Yes, sir. The government actually rescued them from their parents, from their family of origin, where they suffer unspeakable trauma during years.
So with a 50% or more loss of diagnosis of both PTSD and complex PTSD, these children would be better prepared for future reconnection to
That's the idea of this program,
family homes.
to first address complex PTSD and PTSD diagnostic criteria with the children, for them to be able to study, to recover, and to have a life. The third one
and you said there's
is the one you were talking about minutes ago and published in 2020. As far as I know, it was the first published study on remote group trauma-focused therapy, not only EMDR, but also CBT in the world. The aim of this study was to evaluate the effectiveness of the protocol's remote version. Repeat, the effectiveness of the protocol's remote version in reducing PTSD, depression, and anxiety symptoms in healthcare professionals working in 10 hospitals who received COVID-19 patients during the COVID-19 pandemic in Puebla, Mexico, early during the COVID-19 pandemic. No vaccines. They were risking their lives. A total of 80 healthcare professionals participated in the study, mostly nurses. Results provide evidence for the effectiveness, efficacy, feasibility, and safety of this protocol's online version in reducing PTSD, anxiety, and depression symptoms for healthcare professionals working in hospitals during the COVID-19 pandemic, expanding the EMDR therapy frontiers. And our colleagues from Italy, based on this information, on these results, they conduct several more research studies with the same population. Successful, all of them with great success.
What a remarkable contribution at such a challenging time in the world. So I imagine the work is not yet over and that you have other group therapy studies that are in development.
For 2026, we have plans to conduct research on vulnerable populations, such as caregivers of children in foster care, nurses in the hospital's more distressing areas, such as emergency rooms, palliative care, LGBTQ plus populations. They live with long-lasting stress, traumatic stress, and law enforcement personnel.
So you've learned so much from this process of carrying out research. I'm sure that you've gotten better at it as time goes along. How can clinicians and researchers develop high-quality therapy studies
The
in the future?
International Clinical Practice Guidelines are core to support the use of a given therapy. Those guidelines base their recommendations on systematic reviews. And these systematic reviews only include high-quality randomized controlled trials. Therefore, I invite all interested parties to support the positive impact of EMDR therapy in international clinical practice guidelines by reading my paper titled Practical Research Tools to Improve the Quality of EMDR Therapy Research. It is available online for free on ResearchGate, and you can Google it.
I will put a link to that paper in the notes for this episode of the podcast. Well, you've taught me a lot from our discussions in many of the scientific meetings that we've sat in together and from reading your papers. I just want to say how much it's moved me over the years to watch the work that you've done and to see the contributions that you and Lucy continue to make in alleviating suffering. Nacho, thank you so much for making the time to meet with me today and to talk about the development of these group EMDR therapy protocols.
You know, Lucy and I consider you our mentor, our older brother, and we appreciate your words, and I will keep it in my heart.
The second guest for this month's podcast is Regina Morrow Robinson, EDS. Reg is a licensed marriage and family therapist and mental health counselor based in the Orlando, Florida area, where she provides EMDR consultation through Windermere Counseling. She is an EMDR-approved trainer and consultant and an EMDR RTEP and GTEP trainer. In these roles, she has taught clinicians nationally and internationally and worked in humanitarian training programs. Today, she appears in her role as co-editor of the 2024 book, EMDR Group Therapy, Emerging Principles and Protocols to Treat Trauma and Beyond. Hello, Reg, and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Andrew. I always learn and grow when I spend time with you, and this is an exciting topic.
I agree. It's really exciting, and I appreciate your willingness to discuss your insights with me and my audience. Now, I know that you have over 36 years of experience in the field of psychotherapy, including 28 years with EMDR therapy. I'm just curious, going back to the start of your clinical work, in what setting were you working before you trained in EMDR?
Oh, first a residential drug rehab for court-ordered male adolescents, followed by a large medical group that allowed us to work with a whole team of physicians and therapists.
What led you to get trained in EMDR therapy? When was that? With whom did you train?
Well, in this large practice, There were so many complex cases that were hard to help, hard to move. My consultant kept saying, my supervisor, go get EMDR, go to get EMDR. And that's that weird stuff. I'm in the South. It's kind of, conservative here. I did it. I went and took it in 1995 with Steve Silver for part 1 and Francine Shapiro for part 2. Things really changed. I mean, how I understood my complex cases went far beyond the diagnosis. All of a sudden, change was starting to happen. I had a greater capacity for empathy and attunement with my cases. Well, in the early mid-90s, EMDR wasn't really embraced very well, so I was sort of alone and isolated, and my mentor, Carl Nickerson, nudged me to start the local regional network in Orlando, which led to
That was a
becoming
big
a
step.
consultant. Yeah, it was, but I needed people. I needed community, and they started showing up, and it was exciting. We fed each other. That led to being invited to become a consultant and then on to being a HAP facilitator. There were a lot of meetings and trainings that I would bring into Orlando. And so I was introduced to a lot of great thinkers in the field while I was helping build Orlando. I found my home.
Well, it sounds like then through the local network that you created, you were already probably bringing in specialty presenters and running
Mhm.
consultation and doing a lot of advanced development with EMDR therapy.
Oh, yes, any advanced speaker that was willing to come to Orlando, we did our best to book them and get them in there and talk to us. In fact, that's how I met Alon and Barit, the developers of
Oh,
RTEP. Mhm.
okay. So that's how you became aware of those group therapy protocols. How did you get involved with this aspect of group EMDR therapy?
I came out of my graduate program as a marriage and family therapist and did lots of group work in that large medical practice. When I became passionate about EMDR, it became difficult to work with couples and family and integrate EMDR until I started learning group models, group approaches. I could work with couples and families way more effectively, and it helped them stay more in connection rather than separate and isolate with their own individual pain. So I kept going in that direction, and learning RTEP led to learning GTEP because it's built on the shoulders of RTEP, which is very exciting. I had the chance to study that with Alon and then follow him around, become a facilitator. I took Nacho's training 3 different times because both of these models keep evolving. The more it's used, the more potential we're learning about both of them and applications. I've also taken Gary Quinn's ISP and Phil Mansfield Group Flash.
So you were able to leverage EMDR group therapy protocols into your clinical work to expand EMDR from a one-to-one intervention to couples and families, and then with the field work with group administration of EMDR. So you actually got your feet wet, so to speak, and developed your confidence with multi-person EMDR therapy in your practice.
Mhm. Yes, yes. I've always loved group therapy, but it was never trauma focused. So this was a way to bring 2 things back together, group work and EMDR. Most of my group work has been in my practice and providing consultation for EMDR clinicians who are using GTAP and responding to their communities. So as a trainer, they're reaching back when a disaster happens in their community, and I turn around and provide them consultation and support as they get their programs going to respond to their disasters. I really wanted to get them to prepare before the disaster happens, and that's one of the things we talk about in training, how to do that. But that's a
Right.
whole day or 2 kind of training also.
How to prepare for the possibility of disaster.
Yes. I've presented about it at EMDRIA a couple times with Terry Becker Fretz helping TRNs and other groups like TRNs move from individual to group.
Have you been able to convince anyone, or has anyone been able to convince the need for preparation before disaster? Has that begun to
Oh,
happen?
yeah. Yeah, it's happening, but of course not near as frequently as I would like. I recently had the chance to go to work with a group called the Auxilia Initiative, which is near Lake Superior, and it's a group of volunteer EMDR therapists who are providing care for volunteer first responders. The first responders don't get paid, the therapists don't get paid, but they're protecting each other, and they're building a wonderful system of preparedness. And they're using the group work for smaller issues in their community in response. Living on the Great Lakes comes with a lot of challenges weather-wise, and so they are having a lot of opportunity to respond.
What led to your decision to put together an edited book on EMDR group therapy? And I know that must have been challenging for you as a co-editor for this volume.
It was. Springer asked me after both Nacho and Alon declined. So I looked for and invited Dr. Safa Captain, who co-edited the book with me. Luckily for me, he said yes. Safa's male. He's 30 years younger than I am. He's a researcher. I'm a clinician. He was wrapping up his PhD in the United Kingdom, becoming a first-time father, and raised in Turkey, which is a country all too familiar with disasters. Dr. Captain, the reason I selected him was he was the first one to write a comparison paper on the different approaches to group EMDR. And it really had a whole lot of advancements that he was open to. So our differences became our secret sauce. It took 2 years, 38 contributing authors in 11 countries. Some of these authors are really well known, a long history in EMDR, and very experienced authors, while others were publishing for the very first time. Well, Nacho handpicked the authors for ASSIST and IGTP and reviewed those chapters himself, which made those go a lot smoother. There had never been a comprehensive book like this on group written, so we were tasked with designing a format that allowed people to compare the protocols, so speaking to EMDR clinicians, but also to non-EMDR clinicians, non-EMDR therapists, like administrators of large organizations who were faced with overwhelming need for treating more people. So how do we help people understand EMDR as well as the applications to EMDR alone? A simple solution for me was to explain EMDR followed by EMDR in the 8 phases through the group lens. At the end of each chapter, we created a single page that's sort of like a pocket guide. So that forced us to really be efficient in comparing the protocols. It took time. I'm really lucky to say that all the authors still speak to me because you had to drive them through the timelines, but also help them learn to think about it through our design and structure rather than what just came up for them. They were all brilliant and passionate, dedicated therapists, and it's really a great honor in my life to have been on this endeavor with them.
It's a challenge to create a book that meets the needs of practicing clinicians for an introduction to a
Yeah.
specialized protocol, but also still remains readable and helps non-clinicians like administrators and emergency responders and people who prepare for disaster to think
Yeah.
about how could this be useful? Is this something that we need to consider? And that writing the book in a way that reaches both sets of audiences was, I'm sure, a challenge for many of the authors who are contributing.
Yes, it was. It was. But they were excited about the possibility. All of them have the passion to scale up EMDR and to help serve people more quickly in connection, in community at the same time.
I looked at the table in chapter 1. It lists 17 different group protocols and covers at least 9 different specialized protocols in depth. I'm wondering if you have any guidance for readers who look at the book how to approach the challenge of learning about all these different kinds of strategies?
The majority of therapists have been used to providing one-to-one therapy. And so thinking about how to upscale this to two or more is a challenge. If one is familiar with EMDR, skip right to chapter 3, which dives into the overall perspective of group EMDR. There are charts that readers can gain a big visual overview, as you mentioned, and readers can maybe get a sense of the book a little bit better by starting with one protocol, for instance, looking at the very end at the pocket guide and the discussion questions, and then coming back and reading through that one protocol. Each of the 9 protocol chapters follows the same format. So reading one, the second one becomes easier and easier because you kind of get with the groove. The next thing that we did is we applied group to a lot of different populations and situations using case examples, folding in research, which helps a lot to understand the specific types of traumas that you might be facing. For instance, there's an excellent chapter on dealing with refugees written. Imre Canuck is one of the contributing authors, and they talk about setting up the group beforehand, all they do beforehand, what they do during, and what they do after. Because running a group isn't just walking into the session. There's pre-material that you need to plan for and have ready. So we talk about that in chapter 3, as well as with each specialty population.
I
And then
know
what to
Emery,
do
and I've
with it.
spoken with him about some of the field work that he's done with the refugees um,
Yes.
in the region. And so that's given him a lot of opportunities to explore on a practical level how EMDR group therapy can be implemented. So that was
Yes.
fortunate to get him involved in your project.
I was really happy about that. He really added a lot to the whole experience. He's across the board in the process of applying group EMDR. He's definitely one of the leaders because he's just been willing to dive right in. The therapists come together, organize their systems of delivery and consultation and which protocols, and he's led that for years.
Right. Your work with the EMDR group therapy protocols has mostly been involved with supporting clinicians.
It's been within my practice and supporting clinicians, but not in the traditional respond to disasters.
And you've done some of the preparation work, helping administrators and other disaster response organizers to prepare.
Yes, several hospitals during COVID, helping them figure out how to treat their team, give them the resources of group EMDR, and it's been pretty cool.
So there are some of these projects that don't end up getting written up in research articles. It's just
Yep.
things that actually happen in the field that most people wouldn't know about.
You know, research is so critical and important, but it's not an easy thing to mobilize if you're a solo practitioner or just a trainer. There's IRBs to deal with and much more. And we are really blessed that Nacho has a great system in place to accomplish that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
coming back to your book, the two main group protocols that I've been familiar with, IGTP and the GTEP. I wonder if you could comment on the similarities and differences between these two models, and in which context you think each is probably most useful.
Okay. So you're asking me to kind of compare them a little bit, right?
I think our listeners would be really appreciate understanding, like, what's the difference between these two approaches? I mean, because they both have been used with similar populations.
Right. So as I've mentioned, I am a big advocate of both and I write about both, but I am a GTEP trainer, so I'm not completely unbiased in this. I'd like to pause by getting the listeners to wrap their heads around what Nacho, Lucy, and Alon were facing when they created these, because I think it will help them transition a little bit more beyond that. Nacho and Lucy were responding to a hurricane, tons of people facing a lot of loss and destruction in their community. And then for Alon, it was living in Israel with ongoing repeated terrorism. So both of these had the ongoing struggles, or as Alon would like to call it, an ongoing episode with very limited resources. They're both passionate about EMDR, so how do you get all 8 phases in them? You'll see a lot of similarities. For therapists listening, just like you have preferences in food, you're going to find that you have preferences in one protocol over the other. But I suggest training in both before you pick what your passion is. So, recognizing the importance of allowing participants to self-select their points of disturbance they're going to work on is something they both share in common. They both use paper and art to activate and contain the disturbance. They both are very highly manualized with protocols and scripts, which helps to ensure the quality and support of clinicians and the team who may very well be impacted by the same event. They're both researched. Of course, Nacho has this impressive support system fostering all this quality research. GTEP also has research, and it's very helpful, but it's got a lot to do in its growth area. Both of them use a team approach with a ratio of 1 team member to 10 participants in group. This ratio changes if we're working with children, it reduces. The size of the group is determined by the setting and the number of team members available and other things. A couple more similarities are that they're applicable in a wide range of populations and children, both delivered virtually and in person, and both have new innovative delivery capacities that they're working on. The amount of cultural adaptability and accessibility for both of them is very impressive. They have multiple different languages they're translated into. So now let's get into the differences. So time to implement. They both initially had the concept of we're going to deliver this one-time intervention, and then people will move on to other forms of treatment. One-time intervention of IGTP OTS is about 45 minutes. For GTAP, it's about 60 to 90 minutes, in part due to there's some added steps. Both, over time, both have been delivered in a variety of ways, including intensives or extended programs that meet over weeks or months. The next thing you can see that's different is the amount of trauma confrontation. The amount of time and intensity that participants are asked to engage with their trauma during the group. So for IGTP OTS, they activate that trauma with 5 different drawings, and each one of those drawings is 1 point in their trauma journey or the ongoing period of lack of safety. The length of set is until your body feels you've had enough, or 90 seconds. The leader is watching, and once about 90% of the group has stopped processing, or 90 seconds, the set ends. So the maximum length of that set will be 90 seconds. Then they move on to the next.
Which form of bilateral stimulation is used in that
Oh,
protocol?
I'm going to come talk about all of those. I'm going to compare that in a moment. So GTAP, they're doing 3 drawings of 3 different points of disturbance. Each one of those drawings or points of disturbance gets 9 sets, not 1, but 9. The length of set is 20 seconds versus in the other, it's up to 90 seconds, but it's just 1 set. GTEP uses more of an EMD style of processing where you go back to target after every 3 sets and take a SUD, and then resume until you've completed 9 sets. Each point of disturbance gets 4 measures. In group, because participants aren't sharing out loud, you need to be able to have other ways of measuring what's internally going on for the client. So they're writing it down on their worksheets. So let's talk about the supplies needed. I'll come to BLS in a minute, I promise. So for IGTP, you need a single blank sheet of paper. But if the situation demands it, you can make modifications. use chalk on concrete or sand. Going back to using paper, you want to bring crayons. The leader will need a whiteboard or a large tripod because they're going to draw how to set up the worksheet and the script. For GTEP, it's a pre-printed worksheet that has all 6 steps on it, and it's color-coded to match the script, but it also allows the leader to say, we're moving to the green square, or we're moving to the pink square, which allows people who have less language capacity to be able to follow more easily. It just reaches a broader audience. For GTEP worksheet, just like with IGTP, you can use it you can create it out of a blank piece of paper together at the group, or sand, or even chalk on concrete. It's even been utilized in sand trays. Both of these protocols use silent to therapist, which used to be referred to as blind to therapist. Sharing of trauma is avoided when possible. No out loud sharing is being done between sets. This prevents secondary exposure to both the participant and the team. GTEP, however, has this concept of cross-pollinating of resources. So when we're working on step 1, 3, and 6, which are resourcing, people are invited to share out loud or through chat what their resource is. So you can hear, other group members can hear those resources or read those resources, expanding their connection with more resources. So we're cross-pollinating the good, but we are not open sharing about disturbance. This helps foster group connection and normalization, even altruism, because I'm offering you an idea that could be helpful. GTEP tends to run smaller groups, which allows the capacity to do this open sharing of the positive resources. Well, IGTP can also be run in smaller groups too, but it's known to have been scaled up to 150 and even 200 in one account that I'm aware of.
And I'm curious, Reg, when you have these large groups and you need to have this 1-to-10 ratio, do the people who are assisting all need to be licensed clinicians, or can they be paraprofessionals?
That's a great question. Ideally, they have experienced the program, received the protocol. They've been taught how to be a support person or an emotional protection team member, but they do not need to be a trained mental health clinician or an EMDR therapist.
So in areas where there are limited resources, then a small team could go through 2 stages, train a group of people in experiencing the procedure, and then those could become facilitators to larger groups.
That's exactly what we try to do in the journey of upscaling both of these protocols. Yes. Yeah.
Remarkable.
I know, it's pretty exciting. You want to build a sustainable, ongoing program. You want to leave it behind where people can continue to do it. There are places in the world that don't have trained mental health professionals. There are simpler versions of both protocols that are used by just Rolf Carey's program that he started that are delivered by paraprofessionals. And there are examples of both protocols being provided to paraprofessionals. I don't know if you're familiar with ASAP, which is created by Sonny Provost. He's a first responder who became a therapist and took GTEP. And he has a huge program he's rolling out to law enforcement all over the country. It's pretty remarkable.
It's wonderful.
Many first responders and other places are used to peer-to-peer support. So we're working on creating EMDR group protocols in a way that are safe enough to put in the hands of peer support. So a couple other things about what's different is how they do history phase 1. Both prefer that you do pre and post SUDS delivery before you begin and at the end. This allows to see what's happening and any change if somebody still needs more work afterwards. Usually in step 1, GTEP delivers the 4 elements. You measure the SUDS before 4 elements and the SUDS after. without holding in mind the trauma. And that tells you a lot about what a participant can and can't do, and even if they're a good fit for continuing in the group. Both recommend individual screenings, pre-group, when possible, and post-group, 7 to 15 days later, and a follow-up, 1 to 3 months. GTEP likes to use something called SMS. It's a 5-point Likert scale, where you're measuring the severity of symptoms of that person, the motivation of them, and the strengths that they have, or internal and external resources. In phase 2 resourcing, there's some similarities and difference. They both begin and open with creating and strengthening resources for containment and safety, and they end with them also. It encourages a greater sense of connection with self and the present moment, which allows them to be way more open for the group protocol. IGTP offers 4 choices of those resources that you can teach. GTEP uses the 4 elements plus a small reminder object. It could be a wristband that's pre-printed with the 4 elements that they take with them, and anytime they see it, it's a reminder object to check your stress and practice the 4 elements. As I mentioned, GTEP also uses 2 other resources, good memory in step 3, and it's step 6, what they're taking away. So there's a lot of resources built in to both of them, and they're interspersed in GTEP a little bit more than in IGTP. Now, assessment, neither of them use what we're used to in standard EMDR, those 7 questions. But they are accessing the disturbance in different ways. IGTP will ask them to run a mental movie of the event of the experience and then select the worst part. GTEP uses something called an episode scan, where they identify the start of the difficult time all the way up till today. And that's on the bottom of the worksheet. Date today is on the bottom right. The date then is on the bottom left. So they'll tap with one hand from date today to date then, back and forth, following with their eyes, scanning for one point of disturbance, the first one that pops up in no particular order. And that allows them to select a target that's tolerable for them in this moment, one that they feel safe enough, which we know in standard EMDR is often not the worst. The scan allows them to pick something that they feel safe enough to do, which is pretty nice. Alon considers this freedom of choice of not the worst, but which one you want to do as an additional way of building in safety and containment. Now let's talk about BLS.
Great.
So IGTP primarily uses the butterfly hug, which was developed by Nacho's wife, Lucy Artigas, but other forms are also used because sometimes that's not comfortable for people. So you can sit in your seat and march with your feet, and there are other creative BLS that might be applied. Imagine if you have somebody with no arms, right? You need a way to adapt. GTEP also uses the butterfly hug, but for the resource building steps. When we're moving to direct trauma confrontation, there are 2 different forms. One I've already mentioned, that you use scanning, doing the episode scan, trying to find the point of disturbance you're going to work on. But once you're selected and you're going to do the work on that point of disturbance, it's drawn on the worksheet in the center of the worksheet. And you tap from date to day to that point of disturbance back and forth and follow with your eyes. So we're getting in the eye movement. And each time they tap, they're being reoriented to that point of disturbance, which helps facilitate containment and minimizes avoidance of that point that they selected.
The tapping is between 2 points on the drawing, one the disturbing incident and the other today. So
Correct.
The tapping itself incorporates the principle of 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the present, stabilizing back to the present and activating back into the memory with every back and forth tap.
Well said, Andrew.
So they're combining the physical tapping movement
Mm-hmm.
Is this done with one hand, or can they use one hand for the past and one hand for the present?
Well, we typically say one hand because it's a little easy to follow the one hand, but people
Right.
are using two. Yeah.
And so then that the movement of the hand and the eyes tracking the hand makes for combined forms of bilateral stimulation with that procedure.
Which is highly important to Alon. He likes having multiple two forms of bilateral stimulation.
Wonderful.
So both of these protocols are body-oriented processing, right? So participants are invited to notice whatever comes up. But in a GTEP, at the start of each of those 9 sets per point of disturbance, the leader suggests just notice the thoughts, emotions, and body sensations that come up. And then the set begins, and then they pause. Another set begins with the same instruction. Notice the thoughts, emotions, and body sensations. When we get to phase 5, IGTP does not do phase 5, but GTEP does. Phase 6 body scan. Nacho and Alon look at this phase differently, so they apply it differently. IGTP has a body scan at the end of every session. GTEP does not. Alon's thinking goes something like this. Francine designed the body scan to uncover unprocessed or activate that unprocessed material disturbance. It's also a processing phase, like phase 4 and 5. So we're checking in the body scan, does the positive cognition and the body align? We're checking to see if the work from phase 4 and phase 5 is congruent in thought, emotion, and body sensation. And standard EMDR body scans are not done at the completion until there's a target completion SUDS of 0 or VOC of 7 or ecologically valid. In the case of IGTP and GTEP, the focus is on treating an ongoing period of lack of safety or an episode. So there's often not a completion of the whole thing yet, which suggests that there will be residual body disturbance. We're trying to close the session down and close the activation down. So we don't do a body scan because the likelihood that there's still body disturbance there
Right.
exists.
That makes sense.
When Nacho and his team are delivering IGTP and a body scan happens, how Nacho looks at it as this is a chance to compare their body at the beginning with their body at the end and to feel the progress that has developed for them over the course of this intervention, which really is a aha moment, a powerful moment for participants when they're going through GTEP. So that's kind of a difference too. How is that?
Really helpful. That really is a detailed elaboration of the many similarities and congruencies between these two approaches and some of the unique differences. And I really liked your suggestion at the outset that people who are interested in getting involved should train in both of these approaches before deciding what to use. And,
Yeah.
we always emphasize the importance of completing basic training in EMDR therapy from a program accredited by EMDR Europe or EMDRIA or EMDR Australia or EMDR Asia or any other national or regional professional association that's been accredited. For people who have completed one of these accredited basic trainings in EMDR, how can they find qualified training programs in their region in one of these well-researched and recognized forms of group EMDR therapy?
Well, both Nacho and Alon have a full program for training the trainers, steps to go through. Not that different from when somebody's learning to be a basic EMDR training. So go to any of those professional associations, and they tend to list the trainings that are provided in each of these protocols. Scaling Up is a large program that you can learn IGTP assist through, as well as the individual protocols. Connect EMDR is another one who I work with, where you can take the TEP suite protocols as well. there are GTEP trainers around the world that you can find, and I also suspect the same is true for IGTP.
Regina, if any of the listeners would like to contact you to discuss setting up consultation or to find out about training, how can they contact you?
Oh, my email is the easiest, reg@connectemdr.com.
I'll put that in the show notes. Reg, thank you for your time and your generosity in sharing your insights and your expertise and the work that you've been doing, the process that you went through to create this book. And I'm sure our listeners really appreciate what you had to say today.
I really appreciate you giving me a platform to talk more about this exciting approach to EMDR and helping more people. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. That's it for today's episode of EMDR, The Science Behind the Therapy from Sonoma Psychotherapy Training Institute. We hope this podcast helps deepen your understanding of the clinical science behind EMDR therapy. To access any of the resources and original research papers mentioned in this episode of the podcast, you will find a complete list of references and links to each of these studies in the January 2026 blog on sonomapti.com. Just go to sonomapti.com, click on the blog section on the far right of the menu bar, and then select the January 2026 listings, or click on the link in the show resources in the podcast show notes. I welcome your feedback and suggestions for topics to be considered or any issues you encounter in my summaries of the research. You can reach me through the Contact Me form on any of the websites listed in the show notes. If you are a clinician not yet trained in EMDR therapy, I invite you to learn more about the unique EMDR therapy training delivered by Sonoma Psychotherapy Training Institute. If you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to support the podcast by following, rating, or sharing it with fellow therapists, or write a short review of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access EMDR, the science behind the therapy. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.